Welcome. A friend of mine recently found out that her sister has cancer. As you can imagine, she was super distraught. I mean, she felt sadness, fear, anger, and a lot of confusion. All emotions that make complete sense. When life suddenly changes in painful or frightening ways, our whole nervous system reacts, and our minds react, and our hearts react. And that's all part of being human. And then during our conversation, I also noticed these two thoughts quietly showing up underneath all of that pain. And these are two thoughts that I have seen over and over again in my own life, but also in my work with people in therapy. And I know from my meditation teacher training that these two thoughts tend to make suffering even heavier. And once you start to notice them, you begin to see how often they show up for you. I mean, they'll show up when you're grieving, when you're feeling anxious, when you're facing an illness, heartbreak, any kind of uncertainty. So what are these problematic thoughts? They are, this shouldn't be happening, and I can't handle this. And while both thoughts are deeply understandable, they intensify our suffering rather than help us move through it. So there's a story that meditation teachers often share, and it's called the parable of the second arrow. The story goes like this. One day, the Buddha asked a student, if a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? And the student, of course, says yes. He then went on to ask, and if the person is struck by a second arrow, is it even more painful? To which the student, of course, says yes. The Buddha then went on to explain that in life, we can't always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is often our reaction to the first, and that arrow can be optional. So essentially, what he was saying is that we are all going to feel physical and emotional pain as life inevitably brings difficulty. Those unavoidable challenges, he would call the first arrow. And when we resist or fight those difficulties, or when we doubt our ability to tolerate things, it's as if we fire a second arrow right into the open wound from the first arrow. So, I'm Elizabeth Cronin, a psychologist and a mindfulness meditation teacher. And today I want to talk about those very specific two thoughts that tend to intensify our pain. Let's start with the first one. This shouldn't be happening. When something painful happens, our minds naturally protest. We argue with our experience. We think things like, this is unfair, this is wrong, this wasn't supposed to happen. And to be clear, sometimes things are unfair. Terrible things happen. People get sick. Relationships end. We lose people we love. We experience rejection, uncertainty, betrayal. The list goes on. The problem isn't that we notice something painful. The problem is that resisting reality often adds a second layer of suffering. When we convince ourselves that this shouldn't be happening, we often become trapped in resistance. And that can look like replaying the situation over and over, having mental arguments, looking for the cause, trying to get to the bottom of things, or trying to assign blame. All of these ways are tightening up against the experience. But reality doesn't change simply because we're willing to fight. Let's look at a lesser situation. Imagine being stuck in traffic and having the thought, none of these cars should be here, as if the road belongs only to you. We know that's not a rational thought. And trying to fight the way things are just becomes an internal battle that affects you and can lead to exhaustion. So, mindfulness offers us an alternative. It encourages us to accept things as they are without judging the situation or ourselves. Now, this acceptance is not a sign of approval. It's not agreement. And it doesn't mean we like what's happening. It also doesn't mean that we're going to stop trying to improve things. And it doesn't mean that we become passive. It simply means we stop using our energy to try to change reality, and instead we channel our energy into things that are within our control. Because when we finally acknowledge this is what's happening right now, we find our way out of fight or flight mode and our nervous system begins to settle. Then we can conserve energy. We become more grounded. And we can shift toward more helpful thoughts and take actions that have better outcomes. As we shift into acceptance, it's important to take care of ourselves. And a key way to do that is to just pause and check inside and ask, what is needed right now? Or what can I do for myself or for a loved one to make things just a little easier? Because whether we believe it or not, there are things we can do for ourselves, even when we're in the midst of adversity. To make this shift, we need to remember that while we can't control life's challenges, we can control how we respond. Okay, let's look at the second unhelpful thought. Because when this one surfaces, it also makes it hard to remember our personal power. So what is it? It's that thought that I can't take this. And this thought implies that whatever it is we're facing is just too big to handle. And it leaves us with the feeling that there isn't anything we can do, that we're powerless. Again, this is an incredibly human and understandable thought. I've had it myself many, many times. And when our emotions become intense, the mind often predicts catastrophe. I mean, it will jump to the conclusion that this is too much. And then we'll feel like we're falling apart, or we'll start to be afraid that we won't survive. And yet very often what we're actually experiencing is not an inability to handle what showed up, but it's just a sense of overwhelm. And there's a real difference, because overwhelm can feel unbearable. But we've recognized the emotion. We can remember that emotions are impermanent. They rise, they peak, and then they start to shift. And if you think back on your own life, there's a pretty good chance that you've already survived many unbearable moments. Past heartbreaks, previous fears, disappointments, uncertainty. Now, you may not have handled those moments perfectly. I mean, none of us do. But somehow you move through them. It might have been just one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one breath at a time. Sometimes it required you get support from others, and that's important. Strength doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes strength simply looks like being present for the next moment. And strength can also look like this ability to pause and check in with yourself, to ask what might be helpful, and to discern what might still be within your control. So instead of automatically believing the thought, I can't handle this, it's more helpful to guide our thoughts towards something more useful. You can just acknowledge this is really hard. I don't like this. After all, there are no right or wrong feelings, and you can, in fact, have an opinion. You don't need to deny or minimize your distress. It's best to express it and to get some support and help from others. There are ways to accept the situation and the emotions that come with it. And this shift matters because the nervous system responds differently to a threat than it does to a thought that we believe is true. So again, mindfulness can be helpful here because mindfulness helps us notice these thoughts and just recognize them as the second arrow. Instead of believing our thoughts, we simply notice, oh, there's that thought that this shouldn't be happening. Oh, there's that thought that I can't handle this. And that little bit of awareness, it creates space, the space to breathe, space to remember what we can and can't control, space to choose a steadier and more compassionate way of relating to whatever the current challenge is. One of the most powerful things mindfulness teaches us is that thoughts are not facts, and we shouldn't believe every thought. So if you're going through something difficult right now, I hope you can remind yourself that pain is part of life and that additional suffering often comes from the thoughts we have about that pain, including this shouldn't be happening and I can't handle this. And while those thoughts are understandable, they're just not helpful. And we become more empowered when we're able to notice when they show up and take some time, offer ourselves some self-compassion. So maybe the next time you're in a tough spot, you can gently remind yourself, this is hard and I can meet this moment one breath at a time. If you found this helpful, please consider following my channel. And you might also want to share this with someone you know. Thank you for being here. And as always, take care.